time to fuel your business success. Welcome to Harmonious at Lunch. We're bringing you bite-sized advice and expert conversations to drive clarity and growth 5 days a week. Make sure you join our Facebook group at humanopt.com/lunch, where listeners like you and our guests hang out so we can find harmony in business together. If you're building a business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome back in. Today, we're talking how do you maximize the value of your business? It's the golden question everybody who gets in business wants to know, because let's be real, you're not going to be in business forever. There has to be an exit. Let's talk about how you maximize and get the most out of that exit in like 15 minutes. I think we could do it. Michael Haskell, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad at all, Brandon. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on. How to maximize value in 15 minutes. We'll try to keep it as concise as we can. But one of the first things you can do as the business builder, and this wouldn't be brand new advice, I don't think, but build the business with an exit in mind, right? So you kind of start out that way, and you have a rough idea. You're not going to have all the details sorted, but you have a rough idea of what you want the business to achieve, right? From a total value standpoint, from an earnings standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, you got a rough idea, and then you've got a rough idea of how long you're willing to commit to achieve that outcome, right? Whether that's 5 years, sometimes 5 years bleeds into 7 or 10, but you have a rough idea of what you want to achieve and the amount of cash you want to generate, the amount of value you want to create for yourself and your other shareholders, and then a timeline. And then once you kind of have those things configured, or at least roughly configured, you kind of try to back into then what needs to occur in my business for me to kind of get to these targets. So a good example for my journey is I left the United States all the way back in 2007 and came out to Asia Pacific, and first started off in New Zealand, and then later moved over to Australia, and then after that moved up to Singapore and Philippines and Japan. I've kind of broadened my wings a little bit in the region. But the first successful business that I built in New Zealand was a medical service provider. And I got involved with a group of doctors that had a very small practice, and they wanted to figure out how to grow their business, and they wanted to figure out how to be able to maybe not work until they were 70. And they brought me in as a director and shareholder to help them achieve those outcomes. And one of the first things that I set about doing was I worked with these guys to achieve, what would a successful exit of your business look like, right? So let's define that together. And for these guys, they wanted to be, they weren't ultra greedy, but they wanted to be, multimillionaires, where they had the opportunity, if they wanted to work in the future, they could, but they wouldn't have any pressure to do that. And I helped them kind of design what we thought a successful exit would be. And then once we kind of figured that out, we then set about to achieving that, right? We knew, you broke it down into the little inputs, right? And you want to get the unit level economics working, right? So if I'm going to provide a patient consultation, and that it's going to cost me $100, and the doctor's going to cost me 75 of that as my direct cost to provide that service, then I've got 25 of dollars of gross margin. What other elements in there need to be considered in order to decide if we have a profitable business model or not? And one of the first things that we did was we set up the accounts and the admin function that was in Australia and New Zealand. When I got into the business with these guys, we moved those roles to Southeast Asia, right? And to give you an idea, an accountant in Australia and New Zealand was running 80 to 100 US an hour or thereabouts. And even an accounts, payable receivable person was running, $35 an hour. And by shifting those functions from Australia and New Zealand up to the Philippines and Malaysia, we were able to get staff that was just as qualified for a fraction of the cost. So that was, I guess, the first time I had the experience of outsourcing specific functions within a business from a high labor cost environment to a low labor cost environment. And it worked incredibly well. Now that business ended up listing on the New Zealand Stock Exchange back in 2021. I stepped aside about a year later and put in, more professional management, less entrepreneurial, and they still use the team up in Southeast Asia for their accounts and admin. So it's something that has stuck around that business long after I've moved on from it. And myself and a business partner, on the back of that success, set up Navitas Consulting Group in Singapore back in 2021 to help other businesses do those things, right? So to help other businesses save money and therefore grow profit and get closer to your exit event, because as we know, you need to grow fast and you need to get profitable, unless you're a tech company hoping to get lucky, right? And then you can maybe burn cash and find the right exit partner. But for most traditional businesses, you got to be making money, and that basically goes back to how can I run my business to a high standard while keeping costs as low as possible. And outsourcing your accounts, some of your IT services, your CPA services, your chartered accountants, if you're in Australia, New Zealand, over to Philippines and Malaysia is a really good way to do that. So we were able to take kind of my finance team in New Zealand that was costing me about $300,000 a year, between I guess about three people. Shifted that to the Philippines, and I was down under $100,000 a year, right? So I mean, I literally cut 2/3 of the expense, and I got people that were as good, maybe even better, or at least I guess it would be fair to say more grateful for the opportunity. And when you go to the developing world and you pay them reasonably well, they really are thankful for the opportunity. Whereas if you've hired, or I know lots of people in your audience have hired in the States or Australia or New Zealand, sometimes it can be tough to find staff members that appreciate the opportunity that the business owner has provided. We've found in Southeast Asia that's the opposite. They really are thankful for the opportunity and they want to excel. They work your hours wherever you happen to be. If you're on the East Coast of the States, or if you're on the West Coast, you're in Hawaii or Australia, New Zealand, no big deal. They're set up to work your business hours.
Yeah, this is really interesting because everybody and their mother has heard of hiring VAs from Southeast Asia, or even South America, and to save money. And it's not a novel concept by any means at this point. There's a ton of people who do it really, really well. As a matter of fact, we had a guest on the podcast last week who's got a company who does that, a phenomenal company, and they place really great talent specifically from South America. This concept, however, is, and I'll just be transparent here, it's relatively new to me.
Okay.
To hire senior level, experienced and specialized positions and team members from Southeast Asia, I haven't heard a whole lot about that, except for, of course, if you have an international company, that makes sense. But a virtual position for a company that's in the States, that's kind of new. So talk to me about, making that transition. You were in Australia, you were in New Zealand. So still English speaking company or country, but you had to have something in place for your finances, or do you? I mean, you talked about before, you had the end in mind, and then you have to figure out the path to get there. But when you're taking something from, let's just say America, because that's where the majority of our audience is, America, Canada, you take something from America and you translate that to the Philippines or Southeast Asia, Malaysia, like you said, what is it kind of handed over and let them run? Like, you said they're as good, or do you have to have some things in place, and is there training involved? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so one of the benefits to intermediate and above, so intermediate to senior level skills that have already been in the corporate world, oftentimes already working for American companies. I mean, a lot of your U.S. investment banks have offices in the Philippines, Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your big consulting companies have offices in the Philippines and Malaysia. So they've, in many instances, had exposure to American corporate culture. They're used to working in English. They're used to working long hours if they're a junior at, say, a Big Four. Those sorts of things are kind of already kind of trained into them. And that's a benefit with going with the intermediate to the senior, because these guys already know, what the work ethic's like and what's expected of them. So we found, actually, when we have occasionally tried to hire some junior folks, especially if you leave them completely remote, right? Sometimes them self-managing their time and their tasks can be tough. And because we don't want to take our management time to micromanage them either, we've just opted with the intermediate level and beyond. And we've been, our client feedback's been really positive. So the way it traditionally works with us is that we hire the resource in the Philippines or Malaysia or Sri Lanka in some instances on a local contract. We supply them to the client in the United States. The client is responsible for the day-to-day management. So that individual would then join a client's finance department or accounting team or wherever they wanted to put them. And then we would also provide the HR function if things didn't go right. So the day-to-day management is provided by the client in the States. If they're unhappy or they don't feel that the staff member is doing what is expected, then they involve us again, and we try to figure out a solution. Or if a solution doesn't seem to be forthcoming, then we'll backfill with another team member from that part of the world. And that also limits the risk too for the client in the States as well, right? Because they're personal grievance type things don't exist when you've got staff overseas, or maybe very, very infrequently exist. So yeah, I mean, going with the intermediate to senior level has been something that's worked really well. A lot of these guys and gals have experience with, Big Fours and Accentures and JP Morgans and Wells Fargos and, these kind of companies. So they're already pretty comfortable with American kind of corporate culture and the work ethic.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about that culture too, because that's another piece. And I have a personal sort of ongoing experience with this. We have a team in Central Asia. It's our dev team, right? And culturally, they have this sort of yes mentality, where if you ask them to do something, they will say yes because they don't want to let you down. And we've kind of given them the space and the training to say, you could say no. Like, this stuff isn't set in stone. We're asking kind of for feedback, we're not placing a demand on you. But repeatedly we get into these scenarios where they say yes to a feature request on our app or a timeline, whatever it may be, and it's not done by the time that we expected it. And then, there's excuses and excuses. How does that culturally play over between the States and particularly the parts of Asia that you're talking about? Because just from personal experience, it's one of the things that drives me insane. If I ask you to do something and you tell me a day, like, I expect you to do it by that day. If you tell me it can't be done ahead of time, great, let's figure it out. But if you tell me on the day of that it's not done, like, I'm pissed off. So how does that translate culturally?
It is still a challenge. And the best way we found to mitigate that is going back to that. If you've got intermediates to seniors that have already been trained in American corporate culture with one of these bigger companies that have back offices in Southeast Asia, they're already trained to communicate more directly. They're already trained that, look, if you can't achieve something, it's okay to say no, but it's not okay to say yes and then not do it. Culturally, there's some nuance there where there can be some challenges, but by and large, you can mitigate that by hiring folks that have already been trained in, at a JP Morgan or at a PwC or, one of these guys, and they've been there for their first 3 or 4 years. These guys on the back of the pandemic, it's been a real big boon for us, right? Because JP and PwC and EY and all these guys are saying, we're requiring our staff to come back to the office, right? And of course, a ton of their intermediate to senior level people have really gotten used to being able to spend less time commuting, right? So you've got this big net of really talented people that would hop over and come work for us or one of our clients in the States and work remotely, rather than stick around where they've been for the last kind of 5 or 6 years and have to sit. If you're commuting in Manila, for example, or Kuala Lumpur, 2-hour commute is not unreasonable each way, right? Do that in the morning, do that in the afternoon as well. So these guys are spending, if they go back to work for PwC or JP Morgan, oftentimes they're spending 4 hours a day commuting. So we can grab that talent, redeploy them right to a SME or a startup where they're a little more flexible with the working arrangements. And these guys are over the moon to be treated with that level of autonomy and given the flexibility. I mean, it's a really good opportune time in Southeast Asia, because if you want the cream of the crop, so to speak, the folks that went to the best universities and got the best jobs out of college as a junior, now's a good time, because they've been mandated to come back to the office, and a lot of them don't want to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. So tell me, who's sort of what does the company look like that's going to benefit the most from hiring this type of talent? So you mentioned finance, a couple different roles. You mentioned IT. I mean, if I have a company that's doing a couple $1 million, I have 10 or 15 employees. Is that going to be a big impact? Is it maybe a bigger team? What's the sweet spot?
Yeah, so a couple of $1 million in revenue up till about 10 or 15 in revenue is a pretty good sweet spot for us. The guys, the companies that are up over that 15, 20, oftentimes they'll go and they'll hire directly. They'll send somebody over and they'll hire 8 or 10 staff, or they'll try to strike an arrangement with, again, a big four that can provide some back office resource for them. But again, that's more expensive and takes more time. So kind of that 1 to 2 up to about 12 to 15 is perfect for us. We like to start small with new clients. We like to get in with 1 or 2 staff members, and then, provided everybody's happy, then we scale the relationship. We do offer also a guarantee that if for some reason you're not happy with who we found, and obviously the client does participate in the interviewing process, right? So it's a joint offer. It's not like we do it exclusively on their behalf. But if they're not happy with who we found, we at our cost go out and find somebody else and backfill them, without charging anything else. But I think that's the key. Start small, 1, 2, 3 staff members. And then scale up from there. Companies that are trying to do their own, maybe have an external CPA that does their tax returns and maybe does their payroll and maybe does their financial statements once a year, but then has maybe internal staff that do invoicing and accounts receivable, accounts payable, and other bookkeeping type chores. Those are perfect for us, because we've got those skills all the way from bookkeepers through CPAs all the way up to CFO level skills. And the CFOs that we can provide can be both on a fractional part-time basis or on a full-time basis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me just interject this. If you, like Michael said, only have a CPA or have a CPA that only prepares your financial statements once a year, do not listen to the rest of this episode. Go in the description. Call Michael right now, because that's a disaster waiting to happen. Please don't do your financial statements just once a year. Michael, thanks so much for being here. This is a really cool, it's a cool idea. It's a cool way to grow your business. And like you said, make more money and maximize the value. It's, we didn't talk directly about that, but in the beginning you touched on it, and I just want to highlight it. If you can widen the gap between your revenue and your costs, it's obviously going to grow the value of your business. And these people are going to be loyal to the business because they're not tied necessarily to the individual, they're tied to the business. And that's always one of the hardest parts about selling any business, is how much of this staff is going to stay on and for what period of time. It's the most uncertain piece of any business, is the people. And if you can lock that down by leveraging this sort of format, you're in a really, really good spot for selling your business. So I appreciate you coming. Where's the best place for people to reach out and maybe explore hiring this type of talent for their business?
So they can they can find us on LinkedIn, of course. They can also come to our website, which is navitasgroup.ph, and reach out that way as well. We're happy to do an initial, 30-minute consultation with anybody that's interested in exploring possibilities with no obligation, just to kind of talk through, what could work for them.
Love it. Awesome. Navitasgroup.ph. It's on the screen. It's down in the show notes down below. Go check that out. If you're a growing company, I know a majority of our audience is in that 7-8 figure business range. It might be time. This might be the perfect thing that helps you scale your business, exit, and save some more of that money. Because Michael, I don't know if you've kept up with it, but inflation over here in the States is wild. So we need to keep more money in our pockets. I appreciate you being here.
That's it. Thanks a lot, Brand. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the day.
For those of you watching, listening, links are down below. We'll see you on tomorrow's episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Thanks for being here.
Another episode of Harmonious at Lunch in the books. I hope this episode made you think and you grabbed some actionable ideas to propel your business. Don't forget to like, comment your takeaways, and subscribe wherever you're listening so we can help more entrepreneurs just like you achieve harmony in their life and business. For cutting-edge tools that bring clarity to your people and processes, check out humanoff.com.